Uh, an album that I wouldn't necessarily call sexy is our next one, guys. It's a lot of things, but I don't know if I'd call it sexy. But you can feel free to disagree with me. But Matt, why don't you go ahead and lay the table for this one? And I believe you're our first take too.
Yeah, so Big Science by Laurie Anderson comes in at number 157 in the 1980s on Best Ever Albums, number 15 in 1982, number 1032 of all time. It is Laurie Anderson's highest rated album on Best Ever Albums. It's not in Rolling Stone's list, so this is an album we need to listen to before we die, I would assume. John?
It was actually the highest rated album. We needed one more album to fill in because we took one off. Okay. And it was the highest rated album on Pitchfork's top 100 of the 80s that we hadn't covered. And that's how this album made its way into our chart. So
getting
how's that for
there? Yeah. That's good. And Laurie Anderson is ranked number 614 of overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums. So,
did you know she was married to Lou Reed?
I did know that. Yeah, this album.
Yeah,
yeah. In later years, I don't think they got married until the early '90s, and they were together until he passed away. I don't know, whatever it was, 10 years later, whenever, I forget when he died. But yeah, I had to look up.
Bought the farm.
When I had to look up some stuff on her because this is a fascinating album. This to me is, if Yoko Ono wanted to make an album that was listenable, it would be this, because this is more art than music, and it's in looking at her history a little bit. She's not a musician really by trade. I mean, she's a performance artist. She's dabbles in a variety of forms of arts and kind of was in the art world for many, many years before that she came out with this debut album. So there's a lot of things going on here. This is another synth heavy album. We got a lot of synth albums on this week, God, it's really hard to describe. There's some jazz elements here. There's a lot of experimentation. There's things like she puts her voice through like some sort of modulator or whatever on a song like "Oh Superman," which was actually a hit single to an extent, which is fascinating, because if you would have played me this record and said, okay, pick the song on here that was the quote unquote hit. Now, it wasn't a number one or anything like that, but it did chart in various countries and did pretty well. There's no way I would have picked "Oh Superman." I mean, it's over 8 minutes long, and it's one of the least musical songs on here. And it's a lot of talking through this modulator, like it's kind of robotic, and it's got this repetitive sound. It sounds like it's a voice, but it's probably not. It's just a sound that the keyboard's making. It's just like,
You know what it sounded like, Josh? It sounded like the sounds that came out of the Black Lodge in Twin Peaks. Is what I was thinking when I listened to it.
I mean, there is some backwards vocals in this too, right? Or is that
there
a
are
different album?
Yeah.
This is definitely a Twin Peaks record. But I kind of. They throw like on a song like, I think it's "Sweaters." Is that where they have the bagpipes?
Yes.
And "Born Never Asked," the fifth track, is really cool. I like the violin or viola part going on there. That's really cool. In the last track, "Let X Equal X / Tango," you got a cool little marimba thing in there. So there are some melodic parts happening here, and "From the Air's" got a really interesting, that's the opening track. It's got a really interesting synth part and it's going to beat behind it with a saxophone, like, I don't know, almost like Eric Dolphy throwing in some saxophone there. But it's definitely different. She's speaking. It seems like in some parts it seems a little pretentious. It's almost like she gets a little preachy and about, like, I don't know if it's like urban development and stuff like that. So like a little bit of that I'm rolling my eyes at, just like what because again she's just talking, and it's almost like, I don't know if it's beat poetry or spoken word or whatever, but she's kind of just
spoken word.
Yeah, she's kind of just I could just see myself like in a black box theater, seeing her doing like a one woman show where she's just kind of saying weird things and making weird sounds just to provoke emotion or thought or confusion or whatever. So it's, and Yoko, I think Sherry brought up she's like, this sounds like Yoko kind of. And I'm like, yeah, but it's actually listenable, because I tried to listen to back when we did Plastic Ono Band, there was actually a Yoko Ono version of Plastic Ono Band, and I couldn't listen to it. It's like her screaming and all this stuff. And but Laurie Anderson actually makes this stuff palatable and interesting and listenable. I don't know how often I'm going to go back to the well for this, but it's quite different and interesting. I see why it makes a lot of lists, or why people are into it, or maybe even influenced by it. So it's definitely original. So I'm going to go with thumbs up on this. I kind of enjoyed it.
Yeah, I'm going to try and kind of describe what the album is. It's avant-garde first and foremost, but in a more welcoming way than some of the other avant-garde music that we've listened to and name checked. In the late 70s especially, there is like you said, I think it's kind of electronic based, and then on that she's kind of modulating her voice, like you said. There's a lot of repetition, and I think there's got like everything in the kitchen sink as far as instruments goes. There's clarinet or sax in From the Air, and she's not always singing. Also, like Matt said, it's like spoken word on that track at times. She's throwing in effects like dogs howling or yelling in Big Science, and there's kind of a choral feel to it at times as well on that track. And then you've got bagpipes. So the point being is that every track is kind of different, but there's an underlying sense of rhythm to it and melody that I think makes it more listenable and enjoyable than some of the other things. It definitely feels like a performance kind of piece as a whole, and I totally agree. I could see her performing this live and being like, having a million different things going on, and either her running around the stage or having like 12 different artists doing things. On Born Never Asked, there's this really cool, like, I think it's like bottles and sticks. I was trying to look at the instruments. I think they're like hitting sticks against bottles to make this kind of hollow sound. It's almost like a wood block sound, I thought, as well, along with the violin. So I would, if I had to guess, I'm guessing she's influenced by kind of the krautrock stuff, and Kraftwerk and things like that, and then trying to add.
Well, let's take a look at all music, Josh. So we're going to guess right here.
And while
related,
yeah, go ahead.
Related artists: Brian Eno.
Okay, makes sense.
Peter Gabriel.
Yep.
Adrian Belew, and Jane Siberry.
Okay.
And let's see all related artists influenced by Steve Reich, The Velvet Underground, Philip Glass, Yoko Ono, Terry Riley, The Beatles, and Brian Eno.
Yeah, I would say, Eno makes the most sense of those people that I know. I wouldn't say it's really ambient music at all. Mm-mm. but it does kind of, I don't know, it sets a mood, it sets an interesting mood, and it's fun to listen to. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's like fun homework in a way, or something that's a challenge. It's a step up in terms of listening on the challenge scale, but it's like a good entryway maybe into that more avant-garde music.
Well, one thing you guys haven't mentioned that I'm surprised you didn't is the jazz influence on this album. There's a lot of
maybe that's
like
too,
free jazz and jazz sounds on this album.
I said that. Didn't I say there was something jazzy about it?
You said there's Dolphy-esque horns, I believe, was your thing, which
okay. I picked up on that. I thought I said something about jazz.
Okay, gotcha. Maybe like From the Air right at the beginning, which is a track. Let me start by saying the second time I listened to this album, I liked it a lot more than the first. And the first I didn't dislike it. It was just a lot to take in. Yeah. It's like, okay, I'm getting a performance piece here. So a lot of the time when I get that, I try to wrap my hands around, what I'm experiencing, right? The second time I was able to experience it much more as the sounds themselves and the effects and the synths. And from that area, I think the two standout tracks for me were From the Air and Born Never Asked were the two that I liked sonically and thought lyrically were very interesting too. There's a theme of smoking on this album in a lot of the themes, interestingly enough. I'm not quite sure why, but it comes up quite a bit. I found Walk the Dog to be kind of funny. And Sweaters was also sort of like good spoken word poetry, which can at times be an oxymoron, but in this case it was funny. There were things like, I no longer love the way you hold your pans and pencils, which was a word play, but also kind of funny in its own way about the sort of the general feel. And there's just like, it sounds like someone who's irritated, like the sonically. So I appreciated that too. And those bagpipes that the whole thing is sort of hostile to the ears a little bit. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I appreciated what this was trying to do. As Matt said, I think it's as much avant-garde art creation as it is true music, but it is not as divorced from music, because there's actually very interesting sonic scapes here, as opposed to, like we said, the Eno ambient albums, or the music concrete, I think is more what I'm going for. And then do you remember the one album we did toward the end of the 70s that was just basically a collection of sounds along the way? It was a Cold Listen Hot Take, and I am completely blanking on the name of the artist, but do you guys remember what it was when we kind of said, I think we just listened to like sounds and not really music per se?
Was that The Residents?
The Residents, Eskimo. Yes, that was the album. That this is sort of, if you took some of the idea behind that and did put in free jazz association and a little bit of synth as well. Actually, more than a little bit of synth. There's a good amount of synth on this.
Yeah, there was like zero music with The Residents. It was much more just noises and sounds. And that's why I like this. This is kind of couched still in some musical element.
Jazz. For me, it kind of went back to jazz, and it trotted some of the same lane that but like you said, Dolphy was in. Even Mingus at times, just to people who were sort of Miles Davis, some of the stuff they were doing in the mid to late 60s was what immediately popped out to me. And yeah, Yoko Ono is obviously another person who comes to mind, because the performance art piece with the at time abrasive sounds, it's not surprising to me that would be an influence. And she's from New York too, so and John Lennon and Yoko were a big presence in New York in the 70s. So,
yeah, yes, artists that they throw on here on Spotify that's too similar to Robert Wyatt's listed on here.
Yep. Yeah, actually, quite a bit.
Scott Walker, another artist we've covered. The Residents are on here too, John. So there you go.
Are they? Okay, yeah, there you go.
Yep. David Byrne, which. Maybe. I don't know if we've gotten a lot of David Byrne solo stuff.
I think they're more loosely associated in terms of what we've heard so far, but yeah. Robert Wyatt's a good one
here too. Yeah. So.
Well, Suicide, I guess, only in the sense that they were trying to evoke reaction, like in your face, but Suicide was different, I felt, at least. But
and anyway. John Cale. Sorry, John Cale's on there too.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But yeah, I think it's just, I was most surprised that "Oh Superman" was the single, and it's at almost 7 million listens. It's by far the most listened to track on this album, which
I would have guessed it would have been
very interesting. Yeah,
I would have guessed it would have been one of the first two songs if you were going to have a breakthrough on this. Seem like they're the most made for mainstream consumption. So
yeah.
All right. Well, yeah, I think a pleasant surprise of a slight thumbs up from each of us.
Yeah, I would